opportunity is. It's just the people and the product, their attention is the product in this case.
Today I'm sitting down with Toby Shorin, a writer, researcher, and technologist that studies how cultures change, communities form, and the role that technology plays with both.
Culture is almost now just something to be like directly eaten by finance.
Now, I read an essay that he wrote a couple of years ago called Life After Lifestyle, which prompted me to reach out to him. And in the essay, he talks about how we're entering a new era with completely new models with how to think about culture and how culture will be created.
The point is, like, culture as a concept is basically only 200 years old. It's been the entire project of culture. First of all, culture was a verb before it was a noun.
It was a pretty fun discussion, wide-ranging, that has many parallels to the going direct economy, what I see coming down the pipe. Hope you enjoy the conversation. Remember to go direct. Hey, my friends, Jordan here. Just a few words before we hop into today's episode. First and foremost, a sincere thank you and appreciation for all of our early listeners, readers, and supporters at Going Direct. It's really what keeps me going to do this each and every week, because there's clearly a community of folks out there looking to build a going direct economy, which gets me super excited. Secondly, if you haven't subscribed, please do so. Our main channel and community is forming over on Substack. The link is in the show notes below. And we'll also be putting out our weekly conversations at YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. I hope you all have a great day. And remember to go direct. We are live. Toby, thank you. Thanks for joining. And I'm excited to dig into this essay with you. You know, it's interesting. For all the folks that are either listening or watching out there, obviously you've heard me yap a lot about, you know, how I love when I read someone's work and it really hits with me, and then having the opportunity to really unpack it when it has an overlap with going direct. And so, Toby, that's exactly what happened with your Life After Lifestyle essay. So I just want to start here. Is kind of just preface it, which is the beginning of the essay that Toby wrote. And then I'm going to do a quick hook into going direct for you, Toby, to give you more context. Please. And then we'll start unpacking it. Okay, ready?
Let's go.
All right. So this is Life After Lifestyle, penned and published in September 2022. Kind of the intro paragraph, just to frame it up for everyone, is: the era of lifestyle brands has passed. The world is organizing around a new model, profitable cultural belief systems that produce types of guy. As leaders and community members, we have no choice but to understand and adapt to this new landscape. I'm going to argue that we're leaving one era and entering a new one, with new models for how culture is thought about and created, and new models for commerce, but also new critical questions and greater moral challenges. So, before we dig into the essay, I'm going to bring something up for you, and for folks that are just listening, I'm bringing up the good old pillars of the going direct economy. So can you see that all right, Toby?
Yes.
Okay, so I always talk about this, and Toby, I actually saw you had a funny tweet about when someone names something an economy, but what can we
economy. Yo, that's a deep cut. There we go.
So I'm not looking to extract profits here, as Toby tweeted out, which by the way, I appreciated that tweet. Okay, so the whole premise, obviously, as I've been yapping about, is the goal is to build this going direct economy. Why do we need to do that? This is really about rebuilding the social structure in America. And so what that means is it all starts with making products closer to where they're consumed, so people know what's inside their product, who makes them, and how they get to them. And so the first pillar is obviously production. How can we move our systems of production to more decentralized production capabilities? The second one is, how do we build new forms of wholesale distribution? This is largely in the physical economy. So how can distributors move from gatekeepers more to connectors and connecting buyers and sellers directly? And then the third one, which is direct marketing, was how can we actually start to coordinate independent media and creators in a way where they can start to reach consumers at scale, but in a much more coordinated way. And so that just kind of frames it up for you. It's just kind of these three pillars. And obviously most of what we cover at Going Direct is how can we use kind of emerging technologies to kind of make this type of economy a reality. So I think the thing, and we'll hop right into it, Toby, is it's very rare when I read something, when people talk about brand and culture and then they go to supply chains. And I think that was like what really hit me hard, and realized that a lot of what you talk about actually hits on many of the same themes as Going Direct. And so I think it'll be a fun open conversation.
Got it.
Okay, so let's start here. You have a sentence that says brands are meanings that structure our relationships. It's like a heavy sentence. Can you just like unpack that a little bit for us? So what you mean by that?
Yeah. Well, a brand is not like the product. It's not the design. It's not the aesthetics. It's not the reviews. It's some kind of gestalt of all of those things. It's an abstract entity that's made out of reputation, made out of all of these kinds of understandings of a thing. So that's how I understand it, and I think that's what originally got me interested in this topic. Is like, what is this abstract thing that's made out of belief, made out of really nebulous parts?
Cool. And so the Life After Lifestyle piece, it's a pretty lengthy essay. We'll put in the show notes. But, you know, we were just talking about it before we were live. You'd been thinking about writing this or kind of writing pieces of this for, was it about 6 years? Is that right?
Yeah. Like when I started thinking about this, you know, I had become interested in brands and lifestyles, these two kind of abstract entities, as things that were, despite being abstract, ordering our experience, ordering how people live and organize their lives. They're kind of organizing models for the way people would think about products or aspirations, how they organize their behavior. And I was seeing a few things. One is that people wanted more out of these brands. Like brands, marketers were increasingly like marketing themselves as things that would like solve really deep problems in people's lives. And outside of that, there's this whole narrative around like the meaning crisis going on. And the combination of those two things helped me have empathy for the consumer and not take the standard perspective at the time, which was that we should critique people for forming their identity through consumption, or this is like the normal critique of conscious consumption or conscious consumerism. But that I developed some empathy for the consumer. Why is it that they are trying to get this need met through brand communities? But that doesn't mean that the brand could actually fulfill those like promises correctly. And like that's the essence of this article. It really talks about like the limits of branding and the limits of lifestyle as an organizing model for like cultural life in this century, and talks about what comes after that model is recognized to be outdated.
Okay, cool. You called 2010 the era of the lifestyle brand, which I think you were just discussing the kind of what you were saying, the transition of. So I have one other thing I'm just going to pop up on the screen. And for folks, like I said, that are just listening, this is kind of a Venn diagram that Toby had in the document. It's very simple. It's a three circles that has brand, subculture, and supply chain. And at the middle of the Venn diagram is lifestyle. So I think the easiest way is like, maybe let's just go one by one of those kind of three circles in the Venn diagram that makes up this kind of lifestyle era. So you can kind of give people a deeper understanding of like what happened in the 2010s in your mind.
Yeah. Okay. So this all has to be understood in the context of like the direct to consumer brand revolution. And it might actually be easiest to start with that. The internet made it possible to create these new kinds of business models where instead of going to retailers to buy a mattress or something, or to buy clothing, brands were starting directly online. They were cutting out the middleman. They were selling directly to consumers, and like you were also seeing new levels of competition on the brand itself, as opposed to on the level of the retailer or the boutique or whatever. So the lifestyle kind of became, or brand values as an expression of lifestyle became a kind of competitive battleground for apparel brands. Like you saw it there first, but then in the later stages, like we started to see, fizzy drinks as a lifestyle brand, or CBD drinks, or non-alcoholic aperitifs. So all of these niche categories getting lifestyle brand treatments, and so that was crazy. Like, what is going on here? But what was going on is, first of all, like a business model arrangement. That's why supply chain is in there. And I think I've been accused by my friend Nikita of using supply chain as like a big, vague hyperobject word, in the same way climate is used as a big, vague hyperobject word. But what I more mean is, like, there's a process of bringing the product to the consumer. And the brand is just a kind of marketing layer on top of that like matches the consumer demographic, like with that like profit-seeking supply chain. That's kind of how I understood it. So the brand fulfills that intermediary job, and then what it tries to do is like meet a subculture, or it tries to kind of carve out pieces of subculture that it can ideally own. Like, subculture is where you would, I would think about this slightly differently today than I did then, but subculture is where you think of like the kind of native beliefs, interests, desires, cultural tendencies of the consumer, maybe around their hobbies or special interests, hiking, skating, etc., sporting, that they might have. And the brand kind of tries to go in and like claim a part of that, or posture as saying, I'm part of this too. And like in that intersection between what I would have called it like the genuine or the sincere culture and the branded version of it, you get the lifestyle. And I think the supply chain part comes in as like, well, also all of this was like only possible because of very low interest rates. And so that's not really supply chain, but like there's a whole finance side of this. People now talk about zero interest rate phenomenon, but the direct to consumer economy, and therefore the creation, the flourishing of all of these weird little consumer lifestyles, was part of that. Like fiscal policy environment.
Yeah, well, it was interesting during that time, which was fascinating. The amount of money just plowing into these D2C companies, and this is at a time before the privacy. Apple put the privacy controls on, and it was much harder to. It was much lower CAC, much lower ad rates, and it was just about just plowing the dollars in to grab market share. And I remember very vividly. Yeah. This is like the Uber, Uber for X type of time frame, Okay, so then and you have this statement in here where you're like, the lifestyle era was not about creating culture; it was about attaching brands onto existing cultural contexts. So, can you just talk a little bit more about that? So it might be a little bit more clear for some folks of kind of.
Yeah,
how the world
I think that's basically that's more or less what I just said about like how I conceived of it then is like, I think I haven't really evaluated this belief until like very recently, but how I conceived of it then is that like there are these kind of, let's call them natural categories of like natural cultural categories, or like naturally emergent interests. So yeah, sporting, hobbies, let's say knitting or what have you. And then there are these brands that come and try to like kind of parasite on them and posture as part of it. And by posturing, by making claims through their selection of a design aesthetic, through the influences that they bring in to like promote the product, through their brand values, through potentially like claims that they might make around being a B Corp or their charitable activities. They make a claim to be an authentic part of this subculture. But I would say to date, I'm a little bit more skeptical about the idea of an authentic culture, or this like native or like pure culture. I'm not really sure that exists in the way that I wanted it to. And I think I was even somewhat skeptical about that in the piece, where there's a long section in which I talk about how culture is from the start a designed thing. It was invented as a secular replacement for religion, a time when nation states were really just pretty new as an idea in the sense of like national identities. Culture as a concept was like invented at that time, and so it has always had an educational and directly like cultivationist or designerly tendency, this notion of culture. And today I'm even more skeptical about like culture as a natural category that we should use to think about. I'm much more interested in like tradition, which is different than culture, and practices.
When you're saying you're skeptical, and like this, like it's just like in today's world, like culture is just manufactured. Like there's no, because of all the forces coming at us, whether it's social, whether
always
whatever
has been.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the point. The point is like culture as a concept is basically only 200 years old. It's been the entire project of culture. First of all, culture was a verb before it was a noun.
Yeah, for cultivate.
It meant
right?
Exactly, to cultivate. Yeah. Like to culture, like you culture a yogurt or you culture a garden. So it has always had this like intentional activist connotation. Now we have somewhat forgotten that, but we've forgotten that while living in an era in which culture is entirely manufactured. Now, this is why I think it's important to make a distinction between culture and tradition. Traditions are also started, like they're not necessarily designed, or we don't think of them as designed in the same way that culture is, but I think traditions and practices they're explicitly calls to something like kind of out of time, where culture is always thought of as something contemporary. These are pretty new thoughts, but I'm trying to understand the past in a way better than I did, and you cannot really use culture as a concept to understand the past because it's a contemporary terminology.
Well, it's to me, culture is always changing, right? It's evolving, and I think to your point, and it's funny because I'm my wife's French, and so when you talk about traditions in a culture that's really based upon a lot of traditions, I understand that, but I want to go back to one thing and drill into it because I still wasn't clear.
Go ahead.
You were saying verse when you wrote this, you were skeptical of culture specifically for like in what way? I didn't understand.
Well, I think the thing is like there's no more culture to analyze. Like, and as somebody who basically made my career doing these sorts of cultural analysis essays, and this isn't the only one, I've been kind of perplexed recently. There's nothing left to say.
Okay.
Like
sure.
And like before, I think it's telling that even people don't really seem to have much to say about like what is now, even though there's lots of really weird stuff happening with AI, with ICE, with protests, like the with Epstein for fuck's sake. Like there's so much going on. There's plenty to talk about, but there's a kind of cultural exhaustion. And with these, you know, prediction markets seem to kind of perfectly capture the exhaustion and the logic of right now, where whatever is new is purely something to be speculated on. It's like immediately, it can't really be enjoyed for its own sake. It immediately has to be like, I don't like that term co-opted, but like recruited into like a kind of financial scheme. So culture, as I understood it, as I talked about it through the 2010s, is almost now just something to be like directly eaten by finance. And this is part of why I think I'm abandoning culture altogether. I'm basically only reading things that were about like what happened between 1830 and like 1775 right now, because I feel like that's where I'm actually learning the most about like what is actually happening right now. And yeah, I don't know. There's certainly much to say about what is going on, but like culture is almost not the right category to use to like understand it.
Well, you hit on like one of my main kind of gripes, which is everything in our economy, everything in our life is becoming financialized.
Absolutely.
And you know, and I'm not one of these. By the way, I'm very much of a free markets person. I'm very much pro like capitalist, like competition. I'm very much along that vein, like pretty like strong with my views on that actually. But and this is like kind of the impetus for the going direct and kind of building a community around and building like-minded folks around this, which is like, you know, what it's turned into. And the prediction markets are a perfect example. So like take the prediction markets, take even sports betting, right? Where, you know, I'm all for like the freedom for everyone to do whatever it is that they want, but like at least put some little guardrails, little friction there, you know, especially as it relates to like online sports betting. Like it's okay. Like it'd be fine if it was just, you had to go in person and go do it. And I just think this, yeah, I don't know. There's an aspect of it to me where when you get everything about financialized and speculative, right? You mentioned something, no one's living in the moment anymore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Out of curiosity, what's your faith background?
What's my faith background?
Mm-hmm.
I was raised in a mixed religious household. Father was Jewish. I was raised Jewish. And mother was Catholic, pretty devout Catholic. So I have like a pretty interesting dual mix. So
cool. That is really interesting. Cool dual mix.
Yeah. What was that? What made you curious in that?
My Catholic radar is really good, but like I'm always curious when people like espouse any kind of like conservatism, like, or like from what place that's coming from, and like what feels like it's at stake. Because something really important clearly is like at stake for you in this, you know, maybe a feeling about like what is actually worth living for. You mentioned like people not paying attention to the present being like almost offensive. But there's also more with this going direct thesis too, around like, what is at stake? Like, what is it that's so important about like how life could feel that like it's not feeling like?
Yeah, I think what you hit on is it's the social structure piece. So I'm from Detroit originally, and so I grew up in a place where you know, company towns and everyone that sponsored the little league teams, you know, worked at a company that made something, and like that's what was like the impetus of the community and what created the sense of community. And so I grew up in a place that was built around like a production oriented economy. And one of the things people say about Detroiters all the time, or from the suburbs of Detroit, Michiganders, is we have a very strong identity, and we're pretty strong, real people that they focus on things that matter. And I really truly believe that's like a big piece to this. And when I sit down to think about it, it's like the reality is we are in a free market capitalist system. So if we do want to change these systems, if we do want to help rebuild the social structure that I talk about, I believe the true first step is building more decentralized systems, but you have to compete in the market. So it wasn't, honestly, this is like one of the big benefits of what's coming down the pipe with AI and robotics and automation, which is like, you can actually now build much more efficient systems in a more decentralized way. And that never existed before. Before it was just kind of a pipe dream. So
I'm actually curious what you think about that, and maybe there are other people who you've interviewed that you could like actually point me to about this, because one thing I'm doing right now is like I'm working with this venture firm called Baukunst here in San Francisco, and I've been writing this report on manufacturing and AI, on how those things overlap. And we've interviewed a bunch of different experts on all sorts of topics around this. But one of my big questions is like, how is labor affected, and how will AI actually be good for small and medium-sized businesses, like small machine shops in the US, or will it be bad for them and like good for bigger conglomerates? Yeah. And different people have really different opinions about this. And I think the arguments on both sides are pretty reasonable. I'm not really sure, and they may both be right. So I'm not really sure how it'll play out right now, but I'm curious to hear like a kind of robust argument for why it will actually help small, medium-sized businesses.
So I've had several conversations about this. There's several people I can put you in touch with. And even just if you look at some of the past conversations, we hit on a lot of these points. The reality is no one knows. One of the more refreshing conversations I had was with a gentleman, Sam Lesson. He's a co-founder. Yeah, it's Slow. And he had a great take on it, which he was like, capitalism doesn't serve people. It serves pools of capital. That's how the capitalist system works. So when those pools of capital, when that starts to get concentrated to a smaller number of people, the system's going to reinforce that. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And then there's also kind of like the physics of technology, right? When you have so many resources and so much talent going towards building these technologies, it's going to largely accrue into the hands of a few. Now, to your question, which is where I'm just kind of where I'm at on this, which is, it's just about how can you be intentional about the world you want to help create, or the future that you want to help create for the next generation and the future generations. So this is kind of where I go at like the idea of decentralized systems. And it's like, yeah, so there's the technology itself, but then it's like, okay, then how you build your business model around it, how you get the product to market, how you organize ownership around the actual businesses that are built on top of those different technologies or using those different technologies. That's really where a lot of times the rubber meets the road. And so, yeah, I don't know. It's there's no totally. Who knows, right? I mean, I think, and then you hear all these things on labor, from the manufacturers you hear, which is real. Like I just did a great one we're releasing next week with Saman Farid at Formic. You should talk to him. Mm-hmm. They do robotics as a service. They're in about 100 small, medium-sized factories in the U.S. And it was giving me some really interesting numbers where like the average small, medium-sized manufacturer is like runs at like 40% to 30 to 40% capacity.
That's interesting.
And he was explaining that like two things. One, if you look at the jobs that a lot of these lower level manufacturing jobs, it's like putting caps on bottles and whatever it is. These are jobs that you'd rather not have and let them do other work. But the second thing, the second thing is that it's true. It's really hard to find people. Like the turnover is like, I think he was saying it's 30, 40% on average. turnover?
Yeah, totally. Totally.
So I think it's a nuanced conversations. What kind of jobs, what industries, that type of thing. So
Yeah.
I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I guess like the argument that I've heard that was compelling from the, like, this is probably not going to help SMB's side, was it's really hard for those companies to like do the capital outlay required to like bring in advanced automation, either from a like machine learning training perspective or from like a literal capex advanced robotics perspective. And the capital formation for those kinds of companies is hard. Whereas the largest, most vertically integrated manufacturers can absorb a lot of capital, and that was cool. On the other hand, like, it's clear that like advanced robotics like will create new kinds of jobs like almost everywhere that it shows up, because now you need to maintain them. If they are they need to be like programmed for new tasks, like they need to be like herded. So I kind of think both things are true, and I think there's some interesting lessons from the history of automation to look at as like a guide for what kinds of things might happen, like what kinds of jobs might be created, or how will jobs and like work just like actually be transformed in the process of automating more and more of the manufacturing process. But I also prefer to be enthusiastic, and I guess I like appreciate your perspective that like where the rubber meets the road is more around like the ownership of the companies and like the equity distribution of companies, like ESOPs, CSOPs. These are the kinds of things that I was really into when I worked in crypto. And yeah, as of yet, I haven't seen too much like along this line that I'm like really enthusiastic about, but I'm not as tapped into it these days as I was then. So perhaps there have been new developments on this front, or like new kinds of ways of forming and like distributing ownership of companies.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some stuff coming up, both on like from like a like from a, even some private equity firms, and also new models around transitioning legacy businesses to the employees, like employee ownership, and there's a variety of interesting like little tidbits here and there. It's definitely more of the exception than the rule, but I don't know. I also think everyone gets so hysterical about everything. Everyone likes pointing the same examples over and over again, right?
Yeah,
where it's like,
definitely.
Elon Musk and on his way to becoming a trillionaire is not is not the average situation. There's a whole economy out there. There's a whole world out there. He's just one person, and everyone just always points to him or something around him or something that he's doing. And I'm like, yeah, but yeah, like I said, there's a lot of other people doing stuff, and yeah, it's not what like, I don't know. I go back to this thing. To your point where I go back to just like meaning and connection in daily life. And I think this is why brands are so interesting to me. And like this shift that you were talking about around how brands are shifting. It's a very slippery slope. And I think if we're not intentional about how we incorporate these types of technologies into our lives, it's just going to get more and more isolating. And I think that's what that to me is the thing that I'm worried about. And so I think if you can reorient the systems of production, I think it all starts there. And I think it was Karl Marx who had I just read this quote, and I don't quote Karl Marx often at all, but I gotta find this quote because you'll love this. It was, let's see if I have it. Oh, here it goes. The class that controls material production, so factories, land, tools, capital, also controls mental production.
Yeah.
And there was a colleague of mine put a great post up about this, and he was talking about, so when you think about mental production and essentially that's what kind of drives culture, and you think about what the decisions America made, where they're the strongest, it's entertainment. It's, of course, we have amazing technology, and then it's banking, and it's all these services. And so our culture is really formed around that. And I think one of my big takeaways from your kind of lifestyle era was these brands were all services. They didn't make anything. So like everyone talks about they cut out the middleman. I mean, they are a middleman in their own way. So I have this whole thesis that the factory is a new brand. And I think this is what was so interesting about what you're talking about, where we're going. So.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, where should we go from here?
Yeah. So I want to bring it back to so you called this old lifestyle era the CPSE model, so culture, production, service economy.
Production, service economy, yeah.
So,
which is basically what you just said about the brands effectively being a service provider to the value chain, and yeah.
And I think one of the things that I kind of wrote some notes here, it's like before the lifestyle era, it went something like this, right? Culture creates the meaning shapes the demand drives production. And then this whole era that you were just talking about, it's like flips upside down, where that culture is no longer primarily about meaning, it's about helping the products move. And so it's kind of like you said, in service to the supply chains in some way.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's talk about this transition, which is what I'm the most interested in, which is this idea of from making goods to kind of making culture. So talk to me about what this shift is and kind of unpack that for folks.
So let's just acknowledge we're in 2026 now. Things are a little bit different than they were in 2022, but we'll talk about what I saw then and what has been happening in the meantime and what's happening now. At the time, I was looking at this lifestyle brand as evidence for this kind of shift, as everything becoming a lifestyle brand, as attempts to create or join with culture in the way we discussed earlier. I looked at things like brands doing these hokey, we're a cult thing as part of their marketing to as further evidence that brands are trying to create these subcultures. As I said in the piece, that kind of hit a wall because brand is not the correct model, it's not the correct vehicle to fulfill the cultural premises. So something had to change. And the model would actually have to be different. And that's where you started seeing a few different kinds of thing popping up. First, everything became some kind of hiking club, run club, walking club, chess club, sauna club, etc. That's something that started happening around that era and has continued. It was a trend, but it has continued. So that's a relocation of the value from the product to some kind of behavior, or I would call it practice. And you'll notice that aside from the biggest brands, which have always been doing Nike Run Club and so forth, most of the organizations starting up those are pretty small scale. They're either influencer centric or retailer centric. So if the retailer had lost a lot of power because brands are the premium, kind of have a cultural halo. So what was the retailer to do? The retailer kind of strikes back by mediating the customer's relationship to that subculture or that cultural activity by starting to host these practices. So the run clubs and the hiking clubs and so forth. And influencers manage to do this themselves. And this is still kind of an elaboration of this cultural production service economy because brand sponsorships are where most of the money is. But it's a change in how consumers experience the product, because it kind of puts the product it relegates the product to a supporting role to the subculture, which is not how the brands would have had it. So this is a kind of new truce that you could say that developed between the consumer, the brand, the retailer. Yeah. So that's one thing that happened. That's like kind of part of that shift. Now there's a second thing that happened that is less in the realm of CPG and physical products and more in the realm of like health and wellness practices. One thing that happened after I wrote this piece was all of these health and wellness founders started to reach out to me because they were like, yeah, this is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to build a religion out of this thing. And those attempts in the space of like wellness and health, people are able to take the logic slightly further because you are intrinsically dealing with like the human body, which is the realm of like the realm of embodied practice is so direct, it's so visceral. You can also see this is exactly what the run clubs, hiking clubs, sauna clubs, etc. are touching on. But in the world of health, there's also it's really easy to get people to do things because people have a lot of fear and concern about their health and they want to live. But yeah, similar kinds of things have developed in like the health space, and that's where you see like body hormone tracking getting very popular, like insulin, like slapped on insulin monitors being
CGMs,
continuous insulin monitoring, CGMs being very popular. Other kinds of like biomonitoring devices, function health style, like testing and monitoring services, and other kinds of like longevity things, more Brian Johnson type of stuff. So that's another thing that has like kind of happened is the turning of like body stuff into like lifestyle categories and like the elevation of practices in that realm as well. So those are two of the things that like herald this kind of change from products being the product to like practices and behaviors actually being the product. What the type of guy thesis effectively is that, by advocating for practices or by like practices are more related to like the kind of person you are, like, because what you do with yourself is way more who you are than what kind of product you buy. What kind of product you buy is this kind of thin veneer of like a consumer demographic. It's like a starter pack name of a person. But what you're physically doing with your body is really who you are. So by selling, I don't know, I don't want to say it's like directly selling practices, because like the attempts to do that I've seen are like come off pretty lame and cringe, and it doesn't really work that well. But like the production of like kinds of personhood is more this like new stage of the economy where practices are more important than products.
Well, it's interesting. You really realize this now. In the definitely in the Western world, we're in a world of abundance, and anyone that doesn't realize that, all you have to do is just go online and just whether you're using a chat bot or Google or Amazon or whatever. You basically have unlimited choices for like any product within like one click. And so I think kind of like at some level, it's just like you become numb to the actual product, right? Because it's like it's just all around you and you can just get kind of whatever you want when you want it. But on that point, you had this term in there where you say brands want to become culture themselves, right? I think you kind of alluded that to. Like, do you still like, you made this comment where you're kind of abandoning this kind of even culture thing. So can you just talk to us about that transition versus like what you were thinking when you penned this versus like
Yeah.
what you're thinking now as it relates to culture?
What I was thinking at the time was people would directly try to do like ideology startups, or like they would try to create these new religions, and they would approach them, or new spiritual movements, and they would approach them from the perspective of a startup entrepreneur, and try to, and there would be a very weird intersection of like conversion funnel technology and
Sure.
moral aspirations, and that would be very gross and like uncomfortable and not good. That hasn't happened basically, and most of the like attempts to create like a new religion I've seen are completely flat. So that's one thing I realized, is like the people who I feared are like not up to the task at all. And part of my like research now is like figuring out why that is. Instead, like, yeah, what's happened is sort of just like the thinning out of like culture as like a meaningful category, as we were discussing earlier. On the other hand, there is a lot of like snake oil about, and like spiritual snake oil. I was expecting this kind of like weird spiritual revival with like a coin toss about whether it would be good or bad, but like mostly good, I was thinking. And like, yeah, there would be some grifters, but like we'll be able to find the right way. I was wrong. It's like 99% grifter, and there's just so much spiritual bullshit out there right now, to the point about like the economy. I've been kind of taking to calling this the sophistry economy, because like we're back in ancient Greece. There's like a bunch of people trying to tell you like the right way to live. We don't have a Socrates out here to like shut these people up in the streets. They're Everything is now about like this charismatic posturing and like how forcefully you can say something. Is just a much more like violent and like charisma driven time, even in this like domain of like spiritual understanding. I guess that's like one thing that has changed, or like one realization that I've had, that where things played out quite differently.
So where do you think culture goes from here? We're 2026. What are these next in your mind? I mean, this is what you think about, write about, the next 5-10 years.
I have not been able to really think about this properly, but what do I think it goes? It's really hard to say, because like the we're just not in the era that I came up in, and like part of the abandonment of culture as a concept for me is like I'm literally not able to do the same kind of thinking that I was anymore. And it's not just because it's like a young person's game. Like the quality of my thinking hasn't decreased, and I haven't stopped intaking a lot of information. I'll say one thing, like I think we need to close the door on the past. Most of like my two most successful articles both have the word after in the title. After authenticity and life after lifestyle. And they kind of demarcate the end of an era and explain like what happened. But we have been living through really the end of this long 20th century. And that 20th century may have even really started sooner. I don't know exactly what is the starting point for like what we've been in, but something new is starting, and other things are ending, and it's not really clear what the virtues of the new are yet. But I think what's necessary is to firmly close the door on the past, and not have nostalgia for the ways of being the models of the 20th century. This does not mean throwing out tradition, however, because in tradition and practice, we find lots of resources for living a life that's worthwhile. And we find lots of resources for living a life that's worthwhile. Things that are worth continuing into the future. That's the whole point of a tradition, is the continuous extension from past to the future that we can't see yet. But certain things need to be like laid to rest, I believe, before we will be able to understand like what's the way.
I like how you frame that of like shutting the door. And I think that the reality is this, the problem is I believe that we're going through a major shift, that we're going to be shifting away, obviously, from the neoliberal world order. Like this is a major shift of just geopolitically, economically, on every level. And the challenge that I normally see when you see change with anyone is people have a lot of stuff, a lot of incentives and resources and everything caught up in the old system. And it's interesting. I've been finding myself, what's drawing me in and where I'm spending. Like I'm almost. It's interesting you mentioned that. Like probably 3 months ago, like the things that are drawing all my attention and energy are all these new AI based tools coming out, and playing with them and learning them and understanding them and just thinking deeply about how this is going to reorient building organizations and communities and all up and down the stack. And it's almost like I've made myself try to forget how everything was done in the past. And I think that's like the healthy way to think about it. Otherwise, I think you just will drive yourself crazy.
Yeah, it's AI is the elephant in the room for sure. And on the one hand, you do have to. I think the way I've been talking about it with two peers of mine, Kia Kreutler and Calvin Liu, who I'm working with to create this new kind of project space in San Francisco. How we've been talking about it is, being highly attuned to the present and like being able to see the present for what it is, not see through the categories of the past. But I think there's also something that's worth like mentioning is, and you see this especially in like the AI, with the AI people and like the open claw madness and this kind of stuff, is like a kind of newness fetishization where everyone's like, oh, everything is going to change every day.
Yeah, sure.
Every day. And like there's a kind of aspirational attitude towards the future, or like a wishful attitude for the future and how it might feel, where like every GitHub push like is like some kind of new craziness. And sure, this is not the right way either.
Yeah. This
is where what's needed is not only to be with this absolute present and like what is happening now, but also to this is where like the traditions or practices come in, or eternal forms, even like what are the forms of life, what are the principles or virtues that like already are self-evidently valuable, that like we can organize ourselves around. I think these things become especially important at a time like this because institutions are not really capable of upholding those on their own. That might be kind of abstract. Is it making any sense?
No, it makes sense. I mean, listen, the reality of is on all those points. So I think what I would say is your perspective comes with, with wisdom, and wisdom comes with age and life experience, right? But if you're 20, 25 years old coming into this craziness, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Having the awareness, but then also where the incentive structures are, right? Like if markets are just more and more competitive, they're more and more winner take all. It's all about like $100 million in ARR in the first year and all this ridiculousness. And that's what you're aspiring to. It's it'll just be a rocky road. I think that's just like the reality,
sure.
you know? I don't.
Yeah. And I think that's what I'm asking with this question about like, what are the eternal forms? What are the virtues? What are the practices? What are the principles? Like, what I'm effectively asking is like, yeah, what is worth? Like, what are the attributes of a life that's like worth living, independent of outcomes, independent of whether or not like you have like a hit, viral article before you're 25, or like you make it by 30, or you hit 100 million ARR after your seed round. There are other criteria on which to like organize life around and like live meaningfully. My friend Joe Edelman in Berlin would just call these values. He has a very just specific definition of them. But I think this kind of thinking honestly needs to make a huge comeback right now, because there's going to be so much loss and like tragedy, frankly, in like the economic rearrangement that's happening, I would expect.
Well, it's almost going to be, it's necessary in one way. We released a pod a couple of weeks ago with another gentleman wrote, shout out to Meta. He's an online personality, the Meta Project. But he wrote this amazing piece on the necessity of rebuilding our social structure in America. And he said something, which is just totally true, which he was like, we've just organized our entire society around the economic opportunity. And so it's a perfect example. Where did you grow up, Toby?
Olympia, Washington.
Washington, okay. So I grew up, as I mentioned, in Detroit. And so a suburb of Detroit. So, when everyone if you went to university, and it's like, I never thought I would be back ever in the city of Detroit, ever. Mm-hmm. All my friends left, everyone went. And, at that time, this was like pre-big tech. So it was like banking and consulting. And that was like the thing to do, right? That's what was grabbing the talent. And then I just have seen this over time. I had some things that happened that brought me back to Detroit. And it was family related. And that was the most important things that I had to take care of myself. So that was important to me, and I made that decision coming back from San Francisco. But the reality of it is, when I look at most of my peers and everything like that, I mean, everyone moves to where the opportunity was, and so like the familial structure is basically broken,
shredded.
And so then it begs this question of like, okay, well, if this is how we've organized society around, and I always think about this. It's like you meet someone, if you like I said, grew up in Detroit, and you're like, you see someone that you grew up with and they had never left. And that was like looked down upon.
Yeah. I mean, this also, for what it's worth, like to your earlier point about like the Marxist statement, like this is also happening in like the space of the mind, where you have people don't direct their attention into like their immediate environment and like their actual kin. They like instead form these parasocial bonds with like influencers, and they join these communities that like care about things that are like extremely non-local to them, extremely distant from them, to the point where they care more about like the Rizzler drops Grinch bars than the fact that their mom's knee is injured or something like that, or like it makes it easier for people to have like political disjunctures like with their immediate environment and not have solidarity with the people who are around them, because like their attention is being spent on things that are like extremely distant. And that is organizing. The reason that's happening is because like that's where the economic opportunity is. It's just the people are the product. Their attention is the product in this case.
Yes.
But it's very similar, like dislocation.
Yeah, no, it's deep How did you get into all this? Give us a little bit of the background before we wrap up.
Oh my goodness. I mean, oh my goodness. I don't even know where to start. I kind of did, but get into all this, bro.
Like, what do you do every day?
Okay. Well, right now, I mentioned that I work with this pre-seed venture firm called Baukunst. I'm at the Baukunst office right now.
Cool.
And I do different kinds of special projects for Baukunst. I've been running this, we ran a study group where we brought in a bunch of experts about manufacturing and AI. So I've been thinking a lot about that. And that's my first real foray into thinking about AI manufacturing, even though I spent time in the past working on decentralized economic stuff in crypto. So part of what I do is research in and around how emerging technology and culture are relating. That's always what I've done. Currently, I'm doing it as a researcher in residence at Baukunst. The other thing that I do the other way I spend my time is working to create this new project based in San Francisco, which I'm not really super ready to talk about publicly yet, but I will say that one of its principles is this idea of being highly present with what is, and that art, literature, philosophy, and embodied practice will be a big part of it. And aside from that, I know I read a lot. I'm reading 18th century German poetry. This is what, and I'm trying to figure out what these guys were thinking about.
Sure.
I don't know. I write poems too. I'm experiencing a lot of change right now personally. What I felt when we were talking about this kind of economic travesty that may be unfolding before us with a lot of opportunity, a lot of loss, there was some sadness there. And I personally feel that I am definitely changing because of what's happening in ways that I don't really understand. And I think I'm also trying to get a grip on who I'm becoming, as my object of study, culture, is not really what it was anymore. And I have to change how I relate to the world, both the external things that are changing and the internal things that are changing. And so I guess most of what I'm doing is just reading, learning what I can about what's happening now, and slowly trying to internalize it and see what kind of shape I need to become for this time.
Great. Who else should I have on Going Direct? Who else do you think would be a good conversation around these themes?
Okay. A really cool project that is kind of small scale, but I think the coolest thing I've personally seen in around this stuff is Ujima project in Boston. The Boston Ujima project is something I've been paying attention to for a really long time. They are a combination of they're kind of a business improvement district mixed with a for-profit fund, and they have a nonprofit side as well. They do a combination of neighborhood planning, talent selection, and capital allocation to in certain areas of Boston to figure out what is needed in this area. Can we kind of plan for there to be a business here? Can we find the right person to run it? They do a ton of on the ground research and community building to figure out what is actually needed in places. And I think this model is extremely interesting, and they're doing it in a rather small scale way. I would love them to have 100 times the amount of capital that they have. But I think that model is super compelling, and it's I've been inspired by them ever since I worked in crypto. I was this is what a DAO is supposed to be.
Interesting.
Because it's actually localized, so they can. The problem that DAOs had was there's no shared locality.
Yeah.
There's no shared subject of concern. But when you're actually dealing with a city, it's very clear what the needs are, and you can just simply find that out through ethnographic research. Boston Ujima project I think is super interesting, and you should have them on because I just want to learn more about them and how they work, to be honest.
Cool. I'll check it out. How can people reach you?
They can find me on my website, tobyshorin.com. And if they like my stuff, they should send me an email because Twitter is a disaster these days, and I'm not too much on there. But I do love receiving emails. So, and getting one from you, Jordan, was really nice.
That's awesome, man. Well, cool. Listen, I appreciate it, Toby. I look forward to keeping in touch and touching
Absolutely.
bases. We both move forward on this journey we call life. Yeah. All right, my man.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Take care. Hey, my friends, Jordan here. First and foremost, a sincere thank you and appreciation for all of our early listeners, readers, and supporters at Going Direct. It's really what keeps me going to do this each and every week because there's clearly a community of folks out there looking to build a Going Direct economy, which gets me super excited. Secondly, if you haven't subscribed, please do so. Our main channel and community is forming over on Substack. The link is in the show notes below. And we'll also be putting out our weekly conversations at YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. I hope you all have a great day. And remember to go direct.